Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be.
We're rolling.
Cool.
Boom, boom, boom.
Keep that close to your face. It sounds better.
Make
You
out
should
with
know
it.
that.
Make love to it.
Well, David,
Well, shall I count us in?
there need be no count.
Oh, fair. Well, Lexicon of Labour, episode 3. Here we are. So, what should we talk about?
That's up to you.
True. I would love to have a little bit of a discussion around Marxism and
Whoa.
and how it's
Who's got the blunt?
none of us right now. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, you and I've been talking about, is the difference between labor and capital and how they've been pitted against each other. And it just shocks me how strange it seems to people to pay labor well.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a society that I think has been, operating under the rubric of capitalism for so long. And I'm a strong capitalist. I believe that capitalism is, in a sense, the ship or the tide that lifts many boats, but it doesn't lift all, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
even Warren Buffett comments on this too. He's like, there are some people who just don't have the skill set to operate in the capitalist game, right?
Yeah, true.
And so if we're going to, kind of selfishly say that, like, oh, well, this is, the best game to provide wealth and blah, 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 blah. We also have to consider that, like, not everybody's able to play the same game, right? And
we have to take care of those people.
and there are people that fall through the cracks, and we have to take care of those people. And also, having a job is a noble thing, and we need to have systems in place that elevate and, provide a sense of nobility to that, right? Because, yeah, I think in our current system, there's a disproportionate amount of, like, profit that goes to the means of production versus paying a wage or whatever. Like, how much money does the average Tim Hortons employee make Tim Hortons in an hour?
Yeah, like, that's the real question. This is the important question. How much is the employee making the employer?
Right.
And is that proportionate to what the employer is providing?
And I've had friends and stuff like that argue that, like, oh, it's immoral to profit off of somebody else's labor. No, it's not.
No.
But
No.
The balance needs to be there. That is an equitable distribution for everybody, for sure.
Well, I think of your brother-in-law as a wonderful example of this, right?
Big time.
He is being charged out at over 10 times.
Way over 10 times.
Yeah.
He's being charged out at like 5. He's a plumber. And his company charges him out at like $500 an hour, and they pay him $35.
Which is absurd.
It's insanity.
Yeah.
That's absurd.
It's insanity.
Can you imagine if you were, let's say you were an employee of a recording company, and the record you were producing, I don't know, let's say it's worth $100,000, and you get paid $5.
I feel like that happens, or at least it did happen.
Right.
It does
true.
It
happen.
hasn't
A lot.
happened to me. I haven't let it happen.
Well, we were raised by the Taylor girls. The Taylor girls didn't raise no bitches.
But yeah, I mean, like, it's a worthwhile thought exercise of, like, how much, how
Well, let's have that thought exercise. Like, what do you think? I don't know what I think. Like, what is proportionate?
I mean, I think if you're starting out closer to the dollar of profit for a dollar of labor, type of sphere, that's probably close to the ballpark. I mean, I'm not even opposed to talking about, like, a bigger number in terms of profit and stuff like that, because there is, well, and also if you're talking about, just the labor cost versus revenue. I mean, there's lots of other expenses that are factored into that as
Yeah,
well,
you can't
right?
just talk about revenue because, like, let's take restaurants, for example. Their margins are so thin.
Yes, yeah.
Like, so thin that they're not making $1 of profit for every hour that a waitress works.
No, probably not.
Or maybe they are.
For what they pay, maybe,
Yes.
but, like, in terms of, tips and stuff like that, the waitress is making more than $1 per...
Or waiter. We won't be sexist here. There's
Well,
that.
yes.
And I keep thinking that there's industries where this is being abused more than others. Like, I don't think that the wage problem exists to the same degree in kind of the restaurant industry. Like,
well, they get paid nothing in wages.
I spent a lot of time working in restaurants making almost no money.
right. Well, tell us about that experience.
And you work hard too. And I mean, I don't fault any of my employers, but I just don't. We talk about thin profit margins. I don't think in a lot of cases that there's the money to pay employees.
But let's not get it twisted either. Like chain restaurants like Kelsey's and the Keg and Krabby Joe's, they print money.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so I mean, there is money to be made in hospitality for sure. But like, you know, certainly I know also on the flip side, there are like smaller, you know, restaurant owners, bar owners,
Sure,
that kind of thing. That it is a tough slog to make a go of it, right? So,
well, like even those bigger chains, what they really have is the consistent brand, right? It's like McDonald's key is it doesn't matter where you go buy a Big Mac, you're getting a Big Mac.
Yeah.
Right? And similar to, like, let's say Montana's. If you go and get a ribs, like a plate of ribs at Montana's, you can be pretty confident of what you're going to get. But if you go into, like, a hole in the wall, I argue you're often going to get better food. You're going to build a relationship with people.
Generally speaking, I feel that you do, 100%. And you're playing a little bit more of a hit or miss game because sometimes you go into like a spot that you've never heard of before,
right? And it
awful.
turns out just awful. yeah.
But I mean, I do my best to try to find the private business, the not chain restaurant, as much as I can, and find the ones that are good because you generally speaking get better service there, you get better food there, you get better experience there because it isn't a chain and because it's someone who owns it and it's their baby and they care about it, and you get a better experience that way.
Yeah, there's more care and stuff like that for sure. But I also think it's worth mentioning that you know, when you're talking about a place like McDonald's or whatever, they've put like literally like $1 million of R&D into structuring like
a good point.
And
a good point. Yeah.
You know, like psychoanalysis of like measuring like brain waves of the dopamine spike when somebody bites into a Big Mac and like how do we increase that, right? So it's like they're serving drugs in food form, right?
And it's a weird science.
I love that. I love that. That's
and
drugs in food form.
And I mean, if you're going to some, you know, pleasant little mom and pop chain that they might serve very pleasant food that you might find at home, but it's not like hitting on that same kind of dopamine level, right? And also on the side of what makes like McDonald's like able to be such a profitable company versus, you know, sometimes for others it can be harder to make a go of it in hospitality and whatever, is there's actually a good movie about the origins of McDonald's. I forget exactly the name of it, but if you just Googled, Zach's gonna pull that up, but it's about the origin story of McDonald's and how it came to be. Or I think it's called The Founder, maybe. I might have gotten
Yes.
it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I actually love that movie.
Yeah.
And I also love that he's like this 50-year-old kind of washed-up salesman.
Yeah.
But he sees the diamond in the rough that is the original McDonald's.
Right.
And he capitalizes on it.
Yeah, totally. And what their real contribution wasn't really the food; it was the speed, right?
Yes.
And they just like made themselves into a production
efficiency machine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like where they got it down to like we can create a hamburger in like 6 seconds when you come in, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, and they had lineups around the block or whatever, and it's like and then because they're able to produce it so much quicker, they cut labor costs and they are able to produce more for less, and they can drive their prices down, right, and compete on that level. And
that's capitalism.
That's the ultimate virtuous circle that you can it's the flywheel that you can climb to the heights that they did, right?
Right. No, you're right.
And actually, this is kind of a tangent now, but another brilliant thing that they actually did was, which is so really smart for the time, but you know, there's like interstate systems being put in all across America, right? And they were one of the first ones to like every time that there's an exit on the highway, we're gonna put
a McDonald's
there, and it's the Golden Arches, right? Like you see it everywhere. It's like, oh, what's that sign over there? It's like, oh, that looks familiar, you know?
Yeah, like as soon as you see a McDonald's, you're like, I know.
Yeah,
that the branding
incredible,
is impeccable,
incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you're drunk and you're headed home at 2 a.m. or you're getting breakfast,
you know what you're gonna get.
You know, and that's why you go.
Yeah, yeah. And they've got every aspect.
And actually,
of
that's so much what being a business person is being able to replicate a system.
Yeah.
Being able to replicate a system. One of the things I've noticed in what you do with your roofing company is you're just building systems.
Yeah, like I mean,
Like whether that's lead generation or labor, like it's about figuring out kind of a philosophy of how you're going to go about things.
yeah, for sure. There's a great concept that was sort of I guess you could say more or less originated in the business context by a man named Jim Collins. He's a famous business author, and he came up with the concept of the flywheel. And what the flywheel basically is that there is a system of actions that the first system produces the next outcome, and then that continues on around the circle where the thing that it produces inevitably leads to this next action, right? So for example, like with the roofing company, I basically have like 4 pillars of the flywheel, which would be like lead generation, right? So if I can bring leads through the door of like people who are interested in having a quote, let's say, or just interested in some type of service, that'll give inevitably a chance to lead to the second component, which is sales. And so then if I have enough like opportunities where I'm making sales, making pitches, that kind of thing, that'll inevitably lead to getting jobs, which is the third component. And then doing that at a high level and figuring out the production kind of ecosystem. And if you can produce the jobs well and do all that, then that leads to the fourth pillar, which is customer service. And then customer service leads back around to lead generation through referrals and stuff like that. And that's the business.
That's the virtuous signal that or this is the flywheel that you've built.
Yeah. And that's basically like Amazon brought that guy, Jim Collins, in earlier on in their business life, and he basically told them about that concept, and that's basically what they rode up to the level that they did. And I couldn't really spout off necessarily exactly the top of my head what their flywheel consisted of, but like basically it was similar concepts like finding ways to reduce inefficiencies, which will reduce costs, which will bring customers back, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really it's and that is really what separates, I think, the McDonald's from the mom and pop whatever, is that like McDonald's has figured out those systems, and they have like been able to ride that virtuous circle like up to the top, as opposed to like if you don't have a component of that flywheel in place, it's just all gonna, like if you have great food but nobody comes through the door,
then you're in trouble. Yeah. Zach, how do you find your flywheel works in your business?
So I haven't heard the flywheel terminology before, but the way I look at my business is as a funnel. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the funnel. And it's about, the top of the funnel is, okay, how many people can I get to find out about me? And how do they find out about me? And how do I make more people find out about me? And then the next layer of that funnel is, okay, out of all of those people who have found out about me, how many are interested in maybe hiring me? And, those are qualified leads. And then how do I be in contact with those people, or how do they be in contact with me? And really, the business is the system, right? The business is working out, how do I get the most amount of awareness, and how do I convert the most amount of those people who are aware into the people that hire me, and how do I create good experiences within the studio so that when they exit the bottom of my funnel, they want to come right back to the top and hire me again.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's interesting that really what it comes down to is people, right? It comes down to attention. You and I talk about this a lot, and it's the same with what you're saying. It's if people are paying attention to you, that's how you generate leads.
I think
attention is the first step.
Yeah.
Attention isn't everything, but it is
it's the foundation.
You can't go anywhere without it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like there needs to be a lot more at play than simply just getting attention. But yeah, like if you don't have attention, you're not going anywhere.
It's like you said, you can make the best food in the world, but if no one's walking through, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm. If you build it, they will come is a lie.
Yeah.
And all you have to do to find out that it's a lie is start a business.
Yeah. You just got it there. You're just sitting there and you're like, I love that. I love that. I've always found, so I never really, until you and I started talking about it, never really thought about it in the flywheel concept, which I've loved because I feel like that's helping my business. I always thought about it as that whole, we've talked about before, the competence breeds confidence.
I love that.
But part of what that is the way I've always thought about it is this going from nothing to something requires belief. So in order for someone to give me their hard-earned money to do something for them, they have to believe that I'm capable of doing it. But the problem that I always thought was, well, how do I prove to them that I'm capable of doing it unless I've just done it, right? And I think all of us have kind of seen this. Like, you knew you could put a roof on long before the majority of your clients truly believed that you could, right?
Yeah, and there's also different parameters too. Like I've found, like price is a great variable, especially when you're starting out, right? Which obviously you have to turn a profit and all that, but you can accomplish a lot by just, you know, tweaking your pricing structure. You know what I mean? And like when you're starting out, you might not be getting top dollar that like everybody else does. For example, well, I won't mention them by name, but there's a big company in my area or whatever that I'll frequently go in and do quotes where they've already tendered a quote and stuff like that. And you know, some people are talkative and they'll let me know like what they the other company quoted and stuff like that, and frequently they're like at least 50% more than me. And like, you know, I'm already baking in like, you know, profit margins that I'm pretty satisfied and happy with, and like, you know, and then with that 50%, I mean, they have more overhead than I do. They have office space, warehouse, that kind of stuff. But you know, that's a lot of markup, you know, for basically the same,
which makes you
job.
Way more competitive. You're leaner, hungrier, faster, and that's really what capitalism is to a large degree. Is getting people in that are hungrier and more willing to do the work for less, because that's what drives market pricing. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, like Peter Thiel said, the whole, you know, idea about competition is good for business. Competition is terrible for business.
But it's good for the customer.
It's great for the customer, and it's great for society. Because if I was the only roofer in the world, you know, I'd be laughing. You know what I mean? I don't want any competition, right?
No.
I just charge whatever I want and have people by the balls, you know. But
those are called monopolies.
Exactly.
There's a word for that.
Yeah. But it's worth pointing out that you can build a sort of monopoly in the way that you conduct your business, and like building in proprietary measures, and like whether that's culture or just quality of work or whatever it is.
Moats, like you and I have talked about the fact that, you know, flat roofing is had a higher barrier to entry than residential.
Yeah. Yeah, and like finding things like that, and finding things that you know, you always have to differentiate yourself. You know, like you can't just walk into something and be like, food is another good example. You can't just open up a shop and expect to serve a hamburger and think that people will gravitate.
Yeah, there's a lot of places to buy a hamburger.
You have to think of it from the consumer's mindset. Why would I hire you?
Exactly.
If you can solve that question, then you're off to the races.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting point that I think all three of us have reached recently, is where you start saying no to clients. That's a different business stage, right? Than when you're desperate to get clients.
Yeah.
Do you each want to speak to that, and then I'll speak to it on?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very important place to be, and I think everybody should really be having a bit more of that attitude when you start out. But I know for myself in particular, like it's hard to say that when you're starting out and you're like, oh, great, like this business that I started has something coming through that, you know, can make me a couple $100, and it's like an absolute pain or whatever, you know, but it's like,
you go out,
sweet,
you do that thing,
$200,
right?
that's like a bit of money for the day and whatever, and you go out and do that and bring something through the door. And on the flip side, I've had like high ticket items that like, you know, like $50,000 jobs that I took on, and I was like, sweet, like that's so much money, and like that's awesome, and it just turned out to be an absolute nightmare.
Right, it was a disaster.
Like, you know, there's certain tasks that like there's you know, not enough money in the world to make it enjoyable to perform. You know,
exactly. Yeah, no, it's true.
And people that you have to deal with. So yeah, I mean. And being able to pick your clientele, and not like pick your clientele, but also pick your jobs. And like, you know, if you come across, for example, in roofing, like if you come across a job that's just nasty, and I did this a number of times last year, you know, just quote it high, and like odds are that the next person's going to quote it high too, and like if you get it, you'll make a lot of money, and
it will suck, but you'll do it, right?
And finding out what the kind of equilibrium is, and like what actually one thing I've gotten a lot better at is like being able to walk into a quote and analyze the workflow better. You know what I mean? As opposed to just square footages and what's materials and blah blah blah. It's like, okay, what's the layout of the property? Like, is there access to the driveway? Can
I back the trailer up, or are they gonna have to carry it on tarps?
Right.
Yeah.
And so like being able to price out all those contingencies and be able to actually get a better read on like how long will this actually take and what's a realistic timeline, and then based on that, like per hour or per day or whatever the case may be, what actually is going to work for me. So you can actually, dial into more of the like the main vein of like not being underpriced and not being overpriced based on what your
God
needs
is
are, right?
in the
details.
Yeah.
It's the nuanced approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, turning clients down, it started out as just a time thing, which was a nice place to get to, and you have to know where you are.
And I
in your
do think that,
business.
like, I want to be clear, this is a different stage, right?
Yeah, you're
not a startup anymore.
I'll tell you what, I did a lot of projects at the front end of my studio career for free.
Right.
Yes. like you said earlier, you have to be able to prove that you can do it, and when you haven't really proven that, sometimes you just need an opportunity to prove yourself. And some people really scoff at doing work for free, and it's not something that you should do a lot of, but if you're in a position that you can, it worked for me. Is all
honestly,
I'm saying.
that's how my whole career has been made, on me doing a lot of things for free.
Yeah.
Or for a very small amount of money.
But when it comes to turning people down, I think there's a couple things you have to consider. Well, like I said, the first thing for me, it was just time thing. It was just a time thing. But it turned into there's a podcast that I listen to called the 6-Figure Home Studio. It's an amazing podcast if you're a studio owner. If you're listening and you want to check it out, it's so good. But one of the things that they say on that podcast that really, really resonated with me is that you have to be willing to walk past small piles of money to get to large piles of money.
Go on that more.
It is a painful thing to do. You mentioned the $200 or $500 profit job, and it's a pain, but you're moving stuff through the business. That stuff will bog your operation down. And chances are, at least for me in my situation, those projects aren't going to be projects that get me notoriety within the community of people that I do want to be working with. So not only am I not making a lot of money from it, but it's not doing anything for my resume.
I think that's a good distinction to make.
That's it's a bit of a harsh thing to say, but I came to a point where I realized I can't bog myself down in those projects, even if I want to take them on, even if I like the music, even if I like the people, because they just don't, their time sucks, and they don't do anything for the future of your business. And you have to be willing to walk past the small pile of money to get to the large pile of money.
Mm-hmm. And it's like that 80-20 rule, right? You never want to get yourself in a situation where 80% of your work is going towards 20% of your profit,
Precisely.
right? Like you want 20% of your work to produce 80% of your profit, right?
Yeah. And I think like even still, I mean, if there was like a high profile like star, like let's say Ariana Grande came by one day and she was like, "Hey, I love this track of yours," I don't think it would be prudent for you to give it to her for free, because she obviously has the budget to pay for it if she wants to, so you don't want to sell yourself short, but it would be beneficial for you regardless of money to get a placement with her as well.
Sure, and you have to look at every situation as an individual situation, because if Ariana Grande came along and was like, "I want your track for free, but I'll put your name on it," I'd be like, "Okay."
Yeah.
Because as soon as
and Beyonce did that all the time to people, like
as soon as that, I mean, now we're talking top of funnel again. Now we're talking the awareness of my brand explodes in a situation like that.
So many people are so short-sighted on this concept, though, right? They're like, well, I don't work for free. People say, I say that to people. Now,
especially in the artistic community, I feel too, like there's this notion that like, oh, I couldn't possibly do anything for free because
my artistic integrity.
I'm selling myself short and blah, 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 blah. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, for example, if you're like getting into like recording and like, you know, doing albums and stuff like that, who's going to pay you a large sum of money to record an album if you've never done it before?
Nobody.
No
You
one.
know? Nobody.
No.
And so like you have to build that reputation. You have to be able to like, okay, well, check out this that I did, you know, like take a listen to it. This is what I can do. Like, you know, this is what over time you build that portfolio where you can show people your work and be like, this is what I think I'm worth. This is what I can produce. You either like that for the price or you don't, you know? And then, yeah.
Well, it comes. I often think of it as like a ladder of opportunities, right? So you're given, everyone is given opportunities, right? In any given moment. Like a good example is, if you're broke right now, you could go on Kijiji and pick up free stuff and sell it, right?
Absolutely.
And people have done that and they've made millions.
Oh yeah. It's called
Right.
drop shipping.
Yeah,
People make literal millions of dollars
this is
doing
what I'm
that
saying.
online.
There is no reason for people not to go out and just seize opportunities. And what I'll say this about both of you, because I mean I've been in both of your lives your whole lives. You guys are seizers of opportunity, right? Like Zach, when you got the opportunity to work for Walk Off the Earth, you didn't just, oh, it's a job. You're like, I'm going to make this a lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
And when you decided to start your roofing company, you didn't say, oh, you know, maybe I'll do a few roofs and I'll make thousands of dollars and then I'll just do my music. You're like, no, I'm going to do everything I do excellently, right? And you're like, I want to build an excellent roofing company. I don't want to just make money. I want to create a flywheel, right? And I guess I would encourage anyone who is listening to this who's feeling kind of down and out, or maybe like they're not, you know, achieving the things that they wanted to in life. It's like, keep going. Persistence is everything. It's like Kelvin.
Persistence is everything.
It's everything. I have been down to my last dollar, $500 in overdraft, and this wasn't that long ago, with massive debt and no job. And what did I do? I just kept going, because that's all you can do. If you let yourself wallow in the despair of the situation you're in presently, you're doing two things. You're doing a disservice to your past self, who's probably worked pretty hard for where you are now, and you have that whole wealth of experience behind you. But you're also doing a disservice to your future self, because you're wasting time now, time that could be dedicated to action.
Yeah, moping is not a productive activity.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Victimhood is not a productive activity.
Right.
To
And we
the
live in a
exact
victim.
opposite.
we worship
culture.
victims in our culture right
Yeah.
now.
yeah.
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 Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the reasons that there's so little hope right now, because victimhood is being elevated as some kind of...
And why is victimhood celebrated? I mean, I don't necessarily have the answer to that necessarily, but, you know, to tie it back into the capitalism perspective, I mean, maybe it has to do with the fact that I think, you know, the profit incentive is outstripping the value that we place on labor, and most people have a job. You know?
Yeah, the vast majority of people.
Yeah,
and
and-
they're not getting ahead anymore.
Right.
They don't see. I've heard this said quite a number of times. Melissa just said it on the podcast too. But are you better off than you were 5 years ago? Well, the three of us are, but the vast majority of people are not. They're a lot of them are worse off. Now, if you're a homeowner, you're probably better off financially just because of what's happening. But the truth is, our
But also
generation
people are getting frozen out of that market.
Well, that's
too.
what I'm saying. Our generation is being frozen out. Like if you have a $60,000 a year job, which is a good job,
It's a great job.
you're not going to be able to afford a house in Oakville.
Oh no.
No.
No,
Right?
not a chance.
Well, not in the nice parts of Oakville. let's say, Yeah.
yeah. And like, or for example, if you're making $55,000 a year, how are you going to buy an apartment in Toronto?
you aren't.
No.
And what if your job's in Toronto? Which, I mean, there's lots of jobs in Toronto.
Then you rent.
Yeah,
And you just
and
shovel
that's-
that money out.
And you just keep shoveling it out.
Yeah.
And I think that is really, like, we started off this episode talking about the disconnect between labor and capital. And is there any better evidence than the fact that our generation can't even afford to buy a home where they live and work?
Well, yeah, and you look at like just how people who worked at like a Ford factory, you know, in 1950 were able to buy a home, live a nice middle class life, and and now it's like,
And have a retirement?
if you work on the factory line at Ford, like I don't know what they pay, but $20 an hour, 25, I don't know, but like, you're not buying a home on 25 bucks an hour.
I mean, you might be able to buy one in, say, like a Sarnia or a Windsor. But the truth of the matter is, wages have stagnated for the last 50 years.
And wages are also depressed in those areas too.
And
Remember that?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's at what point do we ask ourselves, well, what is all of this about? Right? What is an economy about? What's the purpose of it? Is it just to make profits for shareholders? Because that's kind of the philosophy right now. That's the philosophy of Western capitalistic democracy, is maximize the share. I mean, that's under the rule of law.
You're legally obligated.
You're legally obligated. Is that the best method? Because who are the shareholders? Not generally us. Like, not generally the workers.
Yeah, I would be interested to know like what the proportion of the population who actually owns stocks would be. Like, I would say
That's an interesting question.
And I'm sure we could.
I'm guessing,
probably
but
available.
10%, 20%,
Yeah.
at the most. I would say like
Most
maybe,
people
maybe
think
not,
that the
but-
stock market is gambling. Like even people who are in it, there's a lot of them that think, oh, it's gambling.
I think this is a bit of you could consider it off topic or a tangent or what have you, but like it's worth looking at the education system as well, because, you know, what are we taught in school? You know, we're taught to like, you know, or we read Shakespeare, you know, great, love it.
Yeah, I love Shakespeare.
Wonderful.
You love Shakespeare.
Yeah, no, I do. I love Shakespeare, but and that's just the, you know, first thought this brings to mind or whatever. But like, you know, people aren't taught about their financial well-being. And why is that? Because the education system sprang from the Industrial Revolution, which they were literally trying to train drones to work in their
the
factories.
Yeah.
The public education system isn't designed to enrich your mind and like make you, you know, a blossoming, wonderful, whatever. It's designed to make you a drone.
Yeah.
They're making cogs in their machine.
Exactly. Which we do need in society, you know.
Well, you know, and I think I really enjoyed our episode with Ian that we had recently, and one of the things that blew me away about that episode is like, there are so many ways to find fulfillment and happiness in life. Mm-hmm. There are so many ways. And one of the things that we do is we act like work has to be that. It doesn't. If what you want to do is go to work, make your paycheck, and come home and then live your life, that should be totally allowed. Right?
And if you're going and working an honest day's work and like, you know, in a meaningful job that requires some skill and whatever, you should be able to do that and like live a nice, comfortable life.
And then maybe you're making art in the evenings, or maybe you're
raising children.
Just self-actualizing in any way you want, you know?
Any way you want. That's freedom.
That's a noble life.
And I think that really should be more or less the ideal of like an economic system, is like, you know, obviously I think that some people should succeed more than others just based on their work ethic, how much they're willing to commit to, you know, the capitalist
risk
game.
they'll take.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, their intelligence in terms of how they deploy things and the efficiencies that they create. You have to incentivize those things, but at the same time, really the goal should be to create a system where everybody can reach that upper level of the Maslow's hierarchy, where like you're able to self-actualize. You know, I remember we were doing a job last year, and there were these two guys. When we got there to the job in the morning, they were like asleep in the back alley, and like they'd, you know, clearly been, you know, using a heavy amount of drugs the night before, and you know, we're like living on the street and that kind of thing. And one of the guys was like, he kind of like woke up and he like grabbed a book and he starts like coloring in it with a marker and like, you know, pencil crayons or whatever it was. I can't remember, but you know, just like making art, you know. And it's like, man, like this isn't like people look at that person and they see like a bum or a junkie and whatever, but like this is a person that, like, you know, cares about beauty.
Yeah.
You know? And
it's often the most sensitive people that end up in drug addiction.
Yeah, I think that's actually very true. And like they might present a tough facade, but at the end of the day, I think that's true, that it's people who have been, you know, beaten up and feel like insecure, and they use drugs as a way to cope with that insecurity. It's escapism, exactly. Yeah, for sure. But like, yeah, we should be building a society that like allows everybody, if they're willing to, you know, give something of themselves to, you know, benefits the greater good. Like, you should be I'd go as far as to use the word entitled to live a life where you can self-actualize and pursue your passions and live a meaningful life.
And the nice thing about Canada is for a long time, that's basically been what it is. Like the number of people I've interviewed on this podcast already who are either immigrants or the children of immigrants who came from nothing and have achieved great things. It's staggering. It's staggering. And not only...
immigrants are some of the hardest workers out there.
They bring work ethic that we don't grow here.
Not at
we
all.
used to
It's
grow
so
it
true.
here. We used to grow it here.
Yeah.
Like our grandpa's generation, even our parents' generation.
Well, I think because we started telling our younger generations that, like, well, first of all, like that, you know, for example, university and college was the answer, and like, you know, if you work with your hands, you're an
lower
idiot.
class citizen.
Yeah, like you know,
There's
the
a
real
stigma
goal
about
is the real goal is to get a degree and, you know, be able to
prestige is so important, and yet
But what do we classify prestige? Like, what's the, you know, metric by which we judge that?
I think it's just cultural constructs.
Well, it is.
Right?
That's
Yeah.
what I mean.
Yeah, and I think we need to get. I mean, I think a big part of what we're trying to do here is, I mean, I'm a highly educated and I like to think intelligent person, and I like roofing. I prefer cleaning gutters, to be honest. Than roofing, but like I like being up there. I like how I feel when I'm working hard with my hands.
Yeah, and like I decided intentionally not to go like formal. I mean, I did go to college, but I just like I couldn't stand it, to be honest. And I mean,
in case anyone hasn't realized this yet, Daniel hates authority.
unless I'm the authority,
Right, he likes being the authority, but he doesn't. One of the surest ways to make Daniel not do something is to tell him to do it.
But yeah, no, I consider myself well read and I read poetry and stuff like that. But I mean, I love actually roofing, and I mean sometimes it's more difficult than others. And when you're doing certain things that are dangerous, you have to be really like dialed in to make sure you know, if you're on a steep roof or whatever like that. Sometimes, you know, other days aren't as fun as others. But no, I mean I like the hard work of it, and being able to like look back on it at the end of the job and be like, I accomplished that.
Yeah.
There's a certain feeling you get, especially with physical labor, when you've put in a hard day of work. When I was touring, we would put 21,000 pounds of gear in a venue every day and do a show. And they were usually, you know, 14-hour days. And I would be the guy in the truck organizing the pack at the end of the night, moving all of that 21,000 pounds of gear back into the truck. And when you finish a day like that and you're sweaty and tired and physically worked, there is a sense of accomplishment that you don't get from anything else.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And even like it's another level versus even like the gym. Like, I mean, in the gym, like you go in there and like, you know, most people kind of mosey around for 45 minutes, you know, get a bit of like a blood pump going and then kind of just pack it in and go. But like when you've been out there, like giving it your best all day, it's completely different feel in your body.
Totally different.
Yeah.
And I love it.
It's
I'm
great.
going to be honest.
Yeah. And out in the sun, especially, you know, like, and then you honestly feel so good.
At the end of the day, you feel serene. That's the best way to put it. Yeah. When you've worked yourself that hard, at least.
And you feel tired, sure, but like it's
a good tired.
It's a good tired, and like I don't want to over glamorize it because certainly you can get like, you know, worked down and exhausted and stuff like that. But like certainly like when you're out there like all day moving around, lifting things, and like you don't even realize that you're working, you're just accomplishing various tasks, and then you're out in the sun, and like for me especially like getting a lot of like sun exposure is like really good for me.
Yeah,
and it's good for everybody, but like myself in particular, I can notice a big difference, and it's just phenomenal. It's a great feeling.
And this is not being talked about, right? It's like, oh, if you're a roofer, then you're this.
We
dirty...
stigmatize labor.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah,
I don't like. It's good. It's good for you. It's profitable. Like at this point,
it's good for your mind.
It's great for your mind.
Yeah,
it's peace. I have never felt super anxious after a really long day of hard labor.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree.
Never.
I agree.
There's a sense of pride.
Yeah.
You know,
especially when you know that you've done a good job. When you come off of a work day that you put your best into, and you know you did a good job, you feel incredible.
Totally.
It's actually funny. One day that always sticks out to me for some reason. It was one of the first days I ever got drunk, but I was on a roofing crew, Dean's roofing crew, and we did 3 houses in one day. And I remember at the end of the day, Dean was up there slapping on the shingles with his top roofer at the time, Steve, and they were racing to get this last little garage done. And when we finally finished that, we went and had a feast, and he probably spent, I don't know, $1,000, which deservedly so. We made him a lot of money that day. But I just remember how the team felt. It was like, look what we did. 3 houses in one day. I mean, for those who aren't roofers, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. Most just do one and pack it in,
right?
At the best.
Well, and we had a big crew. There was about 12 of us, and so there was a ripping crew and a shingling crew and a cleanup crew. But there's something about having a clear objective and then working towards hitting that objective and then meeting it. And the only other time in my life that I feel that really strongly is at the end of a campaign where you win. There's no feeling like it in the world.
Well, that's the nobility of labor summed up, right? It's like being able to walk into something, and that's really where meaning comes from, in a sense. You know, I mean, there's other meanings besides work, of course, but really, one of my favorite books of all time is called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and he talks about basically he was a Jewish person living in Europe at the time and ended up in Auschwitz, and he tells his story about the things and he was a psychotherapist, and so he had a very unique perspective on the situation, and he would just look around and, you know, look at the mental framework of people who survived and who didn't, and he came to the conclusion that the people that made it through didn't have some physical gifting, they weren't necessarily always the strongest, whatever. The people that made it through were the people that had a purpose and a sense of meaning, that they needed to make it home for this reason.
Right.
Whether that was like a wife or just, you know, he talks about a book that he wanted to write, and he had this higher goal that kept him focused and away from the pain and the suffering of everyday life. And he goes on to summarize that, like, the definition of meaning for people is that they want to look at their lives and be able to imagine that if they weren't present, the world would be a worse place.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't that really the goal?
Yeah.
Right? That's what we should all be trying to achieve.
There's a punk band called The Wonder Years that has a song called "I Just Want to Sell Out My Funeral."
I like that.
I think it's called that. That might not be the title of the song, but
there's
it's definitely
a line in there.
Yeah. That's
wow,
really good.
I love that. I love that, actually.
And isn't that the goal?
Yeah.
Really,
to live a life that, like, people, you know, when you pass away, they're like, man, that guy really meant something to me.
He was worth something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think I personally struggled a lot in my life with fear of death. And I'm not saying that I'm over it now, but one of the things that I've been trying to do to deal with that is talking about it more, thinking about it more. And as I've been doing that, I'm realizing it really isn't as scary as I made it out to be. Like, it isn't as tragic. I think there was a part of me that really believed that there was this horrible tragedy in the fact that you had to exist and then stop existing, or pass on to another form, or whatever people believe. Now, I just realize that this is just the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
How blessed we are to be alive at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very unlikely.
It is.
Like, I
and
think
life is
about
beautiful,
this,
man.
Life is beautiful.
I think about this all the time. How many billions of things had to go throughout the course of human history exactly the way that it went?
Yeah, there's a
for
trip.
me to be selected to be here.
This is something I've always laughed about. Is people are like, well, what if you could have been born anywhere? No, literally not true. You specifically could never have been born anywhere than you were.
Yeah.
In any other time and place.
Yes.
Yeah, it's wild.
I think about that. I think sometimes we forget to celebrate what we have. So, kind of on this topic, I was thinking about a concert. I was watching a YouTube video, and I was moved by the music, and it struck me how unlikely what we have is. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of people who had to die to figure out how to build the arena that show was in. There were people who dedicated their entire lives just to learning and figuring out how to build the best PA to make the music sound incredible.
They dedicated their lives to that.
Yeah.
They dedicated their lives to that. Then there's a band who it was a very emotional song. Someone had to go through that experience to write about it. And I had to go through similar experiences to understand that emotion. And here are all these people packed into this one room, and it's so unlikely. And we are all moved by this same thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is that should be
art.
celebrated. That is art, and that is humanity. And it's incredible.
Yeah.
There seems to be this tendency to hate humanity right now, to think that humanity's a problem, or that we're somehow it's like we're destroying the planet. That's the one.
We're the cancer on the earth.
We're destroying the planet. There's a lot of Western hates for various reasons, some justified and others. I mean, yeah, we did fuck the natives.
Yeah, we should not have done that.
Slavery was a real thing.
And it was bad, and it never should have happened.
But I think there's also a tendency, and also I think, some of those issues still, have a long way to go in the rectification process. But also I think there's, and I mean, I'm saying this as a white guy, but I think there's a lot of negative energy and attention around it, rather than being solution focused, and that plays into what we were talking about before, the victimhood mentality, right? And
exactly.
There's nothing really beneficial about it, but I can see why, certain people.
It's a justifiable emotion.
Oh yeah, for sure. But and I was going to say on the topic of music too. I think that's the music exists in a time and place where it only happens when you're hearing it. The second that moment passes, it dies.
Right.
And I think that's
a brief elaboration of a tune.
Exactly. And I think that's really over time I've tried to put my finger on it, and I believe that's why we have such a strong connection to music, because it brings us into the present. And we can never experience that moment unless we're paying attention.
Wow.
Especially live music.
Yeah.
I think listening to just throwing on a Spotify playlist
yeah, it's
is
a bit different that way. I think you're right. Yeah.
But you're right. When you're in a room with a band, that moment only happens once.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we love concerts, right? It's experiences. We want to experience something that will never happen again.
We want to be something that will never happen again, and to a degree, right?
And that's why we worship heroes and stuff like that, right? It's they took the weight of the society on their shoulders for a moment in time, and
they stood up.
Yeah.
It's like you and I say, there's that Ayn Rand book, Atlas Shrugged, and what do we say?
Atlas will never shrug.
Exactly. Yeah, I think fundamentally people get stuck in prisons of their own mind. Right. And one of the prisons, I love what you just said about coming into the moment. But one of the prisons is living in either the past or the future constantly, either in regret or fear or shame or guilt, or in, delusions of the future or expectations or all of these things.
I want to mention one on that
Go
thought.
ahead.
I think so many people today are living in jealousy. There's so many people spending their every waking second, and I'm guilty of it sometimes too, but every waking second of their free time scrolling Instagram, looking at other people's happiness.
Toxic. It's so toxic.
Shut that off and make your own happiness.
Yeah.
And you know what? Maybe you're not the most beautiful or handsome person in the world. Maybe you're not the smartest. You probably aren't. But
Likely
who cares?
not.
But who cares?
Live your life.
Yeah.
Make the best of what you have,
And it is actually surprising how little you need to be happy when you change your mindset.
When you switch it to being grateful for what you have.
Yes.
As opposed to being jealous of, others for their success or material possessions.
Which, let's call a spade. That is an exercise. It is a muscle. You can choose to use it.
Don't get that twisted.
Or you can choose to use it.
That's no twist.
Or you can choose not to use it. Being thankful is a choice.
And I think...
and it's a choice that you have. It's a muscle that you can lose, right? You could go into this gratitude phase of life for a year or two and then slowly stop feeling grateful. And what's going to end up happening? You're going to become... And that's the funny thing about jealousy, bitterness, all these internal problems that we can have, is they don't hurt the people that we're jealous of.
Ever.
Maybe if we act out of that bitterness, we could end up doing it. on a really extreme example, but most of the time, those people that you're letting live rent-free in your head, they never think about you at all.
Well, it's surprising to me how many people live in a paradigm where they think that, like, you know, it is worth their while to hurt somebody.
Right.
There's a lot of people that think that way, you know, as opposed to like really, like, why aren't we all just trying to maximize happiness for everyone else at all times? And it comes from the fact that we are like evolutionary creatures who existed in a scarcity mindset that, you know, back in the day, like, it was a zero-sum game.
If that tribe was eating the buffalo, then you weren't eating the buffalo.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. And I think we've talked about this before, but like there's one piece missing in that whole economic scarcity mindset, and that's human innovation.
Elaborate. What do you mean by that?
So we do live in a finite universe, which means there is ultimately scarcity, right? And now we live in a very big universe, so I don't think we're ever going to run out of stuff. But my point is, there is, on a material level, scarcity. So there was a guy named it's Malthusian theory, which was basically saying the world's going to become overpopulated, and then a whole bunch of people are going to starve. And this was back about 150 years ago.
Yeah, we've been saying that for a long time.
Before Wealth of Nations was written.
And it keeps not happening.
And the reason it keeps not happening is only one reason.
Human innovation.
Human innovation. That is the renewable resource of us.
Yeah, if we were working with 1920s farming methods, there's no way that we could sustain
never be
the
able
level
to.
of population that we currently do. But the population survives because we have the technology to be able to provide for them.
Exactly. And where did the technology come from?
Human ingenuity.
Exactly.
And there's no scarcity on that.
None. In fact,
it's
infinite. A nearly infinite resource.
Yes.
As much as we could wrap our heads around, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I often say to people, I'm like, do you realize the magical world you live in right now? You can talk to someone 4,000 kilometers away instantaneously.
I can voice dial them.
I remember in my lifetime, I'm not even that old, like I'm 31, and I remember, let's say I was like 10 years old at the time, and I remember seeing this movie where they were able to like video call, and it was like, one day in the future, we'll all be able to like do this, and it's like, come on.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah,
You know?
right. Yeah, well, yeah.
And now it's like I can... Not just like locally, like I mean, you and I used to talk for 2 hours on the phone every day. We had to dial like 1-403-784-3078.
He still remembers the number. I
remember dialing like third-party services.
There's a whole
call.
There was a whole phone number beforehand that you had to call through to route the phone number to be able to even be able to get like we were the preferred line with each other, right? Now it's like I can video chat with somebody in India
whenever you want.
Instantaneously.
Yeah. And I don't think home heating, plumbing, basic sanitation,
The comforts of modern living.
I sometimes fall into the mentality that back in the day they had it.
No,
but I'm
it
wrong.
was horrible.
We live in the good old days. We have never had it better.
Humans have never had it this good.
Do we still have problems?
No.
Of course, plenty of them, and we should work as hard as we can to root them out and solve them. But we have never had it better, and there has never been more reasons to be thankful.
And I think the perspective of like the dissolution of society, if you want to call it that, or whatever it is, really stems often from the fact that we do have it so good.
Yeah,
and I think like
we need something to worry about. Right?
Yeah,
humans are inherently anxious creatures, and the reason we're inherently anxious is because anxiety was very useful when the lions were coming.
Well, it is still useful. Going back to again that guy Jim Collins I mentioned earlier, he has a trait that he uncovered through a lot of research about like 10x companies. So like companies, he did case studies between, you know, like let's say like IBM versus like their competitor when they were kind of on an equal playing field, and like what led IBM to become IBM versus this company that just failed. And one trait that he uncovered that these great companies have, he termed productive paranoia. And it's so true. It's a very useful skill to have. If you're always living in fear, essentially, fear that drives you to action, right? Not fear that cripples you.
Yes.
But fear that drives you towards wanting to ensure that your safety will be secured, That's a very useful tool to have.
Paying attention to danger is how we got this far. Humans' ability to pay attention to signals that that indicate threats. Actually, why I think we bonded so well with dogs as humans is because they're also great at sensing danger, and so that took something that was a skill set of ours and it enhanced it.
That's a good point, actually. And you even look at like domesticated dogs today, like they'll often take so much pride in like barking at the door when they hear somebody coming, right? And like alerting their masters that like, hey, danger's here,
Danger's
right?
here.
And,
Other.
Something I don't recognize.
Yes.
Yeah. This doesn't fit into the pattern of my worldview.
And that's really what building a worldview and having patterns is about, is sensing danger, right? Because it's like, well, it isn't that we understand some fundamental building block of the universe when we see a pattern, but the pattern is how we interpret the universe.
And we're always building that pattern.
Yeah. Oh, every moment, habits, everything that we do, right? How long have we gone?
We're at 54 minutes.
Well, so we're a little over. Oh, this has been great.
Yeah, this is fun.
We're going to do this every week. Like, why not?
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, Zach,
I guess we'll wrap it.
Thank you. This is the most Zach has talked in any episode, and I think he needs to do it more.
And he had some wonderful contributions,
I think he needs to do it more. Yeah.
Well, here I am, and here I'll stay.
Thanks everyone for listening. Basically, to me and my cousins just talking about whatever comes to our head.
Until next time.
Until next time. Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.